Sign here and release the funds, my father said, sliding papers across the courtroom table as relatives watched. You owe this family, my mother added. I reached for the pen. Then the judge asked for the original signature file. My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 37 years old. I work as a dental office manager, handling billing, insurance claims, and patient accounts for a busy practice downtown. In my family, I've always been known as reliable but invisible, the person who handled paperwork and crises quietly while everyone else lived their lives without interruption. Over 15 years, I saved $480,000 through strict budgeting, overtime shifts I volunteered for, and sacrifices I made without complaining to anyone. My parents struggled financially for as long as I could remember, making risky investments that never paid off and leaning on me repeatedly when things fell apart. I paid their medical bills when insurance lapsed. I prevented utility shutoffs during winters when they couldn't cover basic expenses. I covered mortgage payment gaps that would have led to foreclosure. None of it was ever acknowledged publicly. My family praised my younger brother as the favorite, despite his failed business ventures that cost them even more money. I lived modestly in a small apartment, drove an old car, and believed that loyalty and consistency would eventually be recognized and appreciated. I wasn't rich or glamorous, never made grand gestures or demanded attention for what I contributed, but I had something they didn't expect. I had meticulous financial records going back over a decade, and I had legal protections on every account I'd ever opened. If you've supported family members financially without appreciation or acknowledgement, this story is for you. Have you ever been pressured to sacrifice your own security for relatives who took it for granted? Share your experience in the comments below. Click like or hype to support stories about setting financial boundaries and protecting yourself. My parents called what they described as a family legal meeting, claiming it was about estate planning and making sure everyone understood the family's financial future. The setting was a court mediation room, not an attorney's private office like I'd expected. The air smelled like stale coffee and floor cleaner. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My father sat across from me with a folder of documents, and my mother sat beside him with her hands folded on the table. Several relatives I barely saw throughout the year were positioned along the walls like witnesses. The mediator, a tired-looking man in his 50s, explained this was about clarifying family obligations and formalizing agreements. Then my father opened the folder and presented documents requesting the immediate transfer of my savings into a family trust they had established without telling me. "It's for the family survival, Lauren," he said, his voice calm but insistent. "You're single. You don't need this much money sitting idle. We can invest it properly and help everyone." My mother leaned forward. "You agreed to this verbally years ago. You said you'd always support us. This is just making it official." I stared at the papers, my heart pounding. Relatives around the room nodded, reinforcing the pressure and painting me as selfish for hesitating. My aunt said, "Family takes care of family. That's how it's always been." The mediator pushed a pen toward me. "Signing now avoids prolonged conflict and legal fees that benefit no one." I picked up the documents and examined them more closely. The account numbers listed were incorrect. The bank letterhead was outdated, from an institution I hadn't used in 5 years. My chair had been moved slightly back from the main table, a small but deliberate symbol of exclusion. The public humiliation built as my brother spoke up from the side of the room. "She's always been dramatic about money. Just sign it and stop making this harder than it needs to be." I felt cornered, trapped in a room full of people I'd helped for years who were now treating me like an obstacle. Then, the judge overseeing the mediation, a woman with sharp eyes and a skeptical expression, looked up from her own review of the paperwork. "Before we proceed, I need the original bank signature verification files for these accounts. This documentation appears incomplete." The betrayals came in waves after that meeting ended without my signature. First, my parents filed a temporary financial guardianship claim with the court, citing my supposed emotional instability and inability to manage my own affairs responsibly. I received official notice that they were seeking legal authority over my accounts. I was immediately removed from shared financial portals I had helped set up and manage for them over the years, systems I'd created to track their expenses and keep them from falling further into debt. Second, a public smear campaign began almost immediately. Posts appeared on social media from relatives about children who abandoned their parents financially in their time of need, who prioritized selfish pursuits over family obligations. The language was careful, never naming me directly, but everyone who knew the family understood exactly who they meant. Coworkers at the dental office started asking uncomfortable questions, wondering if it was true that I'd refused to help my struggling parents despite having the means. One patient I'd known for years mentioned hearing something about family drama and asked if I was okay. The shame was overwhelming. Third came systematic document manipulation designed to rewrite history. My parents submitted sworn statements to the court claiming I had verbally promised lifelong financial support and had agreed years ago to eventually transfer my assets into family management. A distant relative I met maybe twice in my life signed an affidavit stating I'd told her I planned to move abroad permanently and abandon the family entirely, which was completely fabricated. Bank statements were altered to make my loans look like gifts. Text messages were selectively edited to remove context. I stopped arguing with anyone publicly or trying to defend myself in family group chats that had turned hostile. Instead, I began methodically collecting certified bank records, downloading transaction histories, and requesting official documentation from every institution I'd ever worked with. Something shifted inside me during those weeks. The hurt didn't disappear, but it transformed into something colder and more focused. I wasn't going to beg for fairness or appeal to family loyalty that had never been reciprocal. I was going to let the evidence speak. What my family didn't know, what they had completely failed to anticipate, was that I had recorded our financial meetings over the past several years, not secretly, but openly, with my phone on the table, explaining I needed accurate notes for budgeting purposes. In those recordings, my father clearly acknowledged that money I'd provided were loans, not gifts, and that repayment would happen when their situation improved. I had email exchanges where he discussed repayment schedules and thanked me for the temporary assistance. I had bank logs showing multiple attempted unauthorized accesses to my accounts from IP addresses that traced back to my parents' home. Someone had tried to log in using old passwords, trying to gain access without my knowledge. I had notarized loan agreements my parents had signed 3 years earlier when I'd provided a substantial amount to prevent foreclosure, documents that explicitly stated terms and repayment expectations. I organized everything into a comprehensive timeline I labeled simply financial transfers and repayments, cross-referencing every claim they'd made with contradicting evidence. I wasn't preparing to defend myself emotionally or make appeals about fairness and family values. I was preparing to prove intent and attempted fraud with documentation that couldn't be disputed or explained away. The person who helped me understand the severity of what was happening was Dr. Patel, the dentist I'd worked for over 8 years. He'd watched me handle the office's complex billing and insurance systems with precision and had always respected my competence. When I finally explained what was happening, he didn't hesitate. He connected me immediately with a reputable financial attorney he knew personally, someone who specialized in elder financial abuse cases but also handled exploitation attempts that went the other direction. The attorney reviewed everything I'd collected and told me bluntly that my parents had likely committed multiple violations of financial law. She advised filing for a forensic document review through official court channels, which would examine the signatures and authorization claims my parents had submitted. I filed everything quietly, without announcing it to anyone in the family. Meanwhile, my parents grew more confident by the day. They discussed openly with relatives how they planned to use my savings, talking about investments and home repairs and helping my brother start another business venture. My brother made plans for how he'd use money he assumed was already secured, drawing up business proposals and contacting potential partners. Relatives congratulated my parents on finally getting me to see reason and do the right thing. I stayed completely silent, watching it all unfold while the legal process moved forward behind the scenes. The tension built steadily toward the final court review date, a hearing my parents attended expecting a formality that would finalize the transfer. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, with wood paneling that absorbed sound and made every word feel weighted. The smell of old paper and floor wax hung in the air. My parents sat with their attorney on one side. I sat with mine on the other. The judge who'd requested the signature verification presided, and she began by addressing the forensic document review she'd ordered weeks earlier. An expert witness took the stand and presented findings. The signatures on the transfer authorization documents my parents had submitted were digitally copied and pasted, not original signatures made by my hand. The metadata showed the files had been created and modified on my father's home computer. A bank representative testified next, a compliance officer, who confirmed that no transfer authorization had ever been filed by me through official channels, and that the account numbers listed on the documents didn't match my current accounts. She noted that multiple unauthorized login attempts had been flagged by their security systems. Then my attorney presented the emails, playing audio recordings where my father explicitly acknowledged debts owed to me and discussed repayment. The courtroom was silent, except for his recorded voice thanking me for the loan and promising to pay it back within 2 years. The judge questioned my parents directly about the inconsistencies between what they'd submitted and what the evidence showed. My father stammered, claiming there had been misunderstandings and miscommunications. My mother said she'd been confused about which documents were which. Their attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable, flipping through papers and offering weak explanations about potential administrative errors. I spoke only once during the entire hearing. My voice was calm and clear. Loans are not inheritance. Consent is not coercion. The judge took less than 5 minutes to make her ruling. She dismissed the transfer request entirely and ordered an investigation into attempted financial exploitation of an adult child. She noted that the evidence suggested deliberate fraud rather than confusion. The power in that room shifted instantly. Relatives who'd come to support my parents avoided eye contact and began quietly gathering their things. My brother stared at the table. My mother cried, but no one moved to comfort her. My savings were legally protected within days, with additional safeguards put in place at my bank to prevent any future unauthorized access attempts. The court ordered a formal repayment schedule for the loans I'd provided over the years, money I'd never actually expected to see again, but that was now legally enforceable. My parents faced ongoing legal scrutiny and experienced social consequences within the extended family as word spread about what had really happened. Some relatives reached out with private apologies, carefully worded messages that acknowledged they'd been wrong, without fully admitting how they'd contributed to the pressure. Others simply distanced themselves entirely, removing me from social media and pretending none of it had occurred. I set firm financial boundaries moving forward and transferred all my accounts to a completely different institution my parents had no connection to. I changed passwords, enabled every security feature available, and made it clear in writing that I would not be providing any further financial assistance under any circumstances. What I reflected on most during the months that followed was how documentation had protected me when loyalty was weaponized, when years of helping were reframed as obligation and debt. I learned that silence is not surrender when it is backed by proof that speaks louder than any emotional appeal or family pressure. If you've been pressured to support family financially beyond what you could reasonably provide, beyond what was fair or sustainable, you understand exactly how isolating that feels. Share your experience in the comments about financial coercion or guilt used as a weapon. Subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries and maintaining self-respect when family demands too much. Remember that protecting your own financial stability is not selfish, it's necessary. Click Hike to help this story reach others who desperately need to hear it. If this story resonated with you, let me know by liking the video and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Join this community and tell me where you're watching from. Standing up for yourself, especially against family, is incredibly difficult, but absolutely necessary. Click hype so others facing similar pressure can find the support and validation they need. Thank you for being here.